Hello and welcome to Ukraine in Flames, a special project dedicated to the Russian war against Ukraine and brought to you by three organizations: Ukraine Crisis Media Center, Ukraine Catholic University's Analytical Center, and NGO Euro-Atlantic Course. My name is Alexandra Sakhanovska. I'm the head of Hybrid Warfare Analytical Group at Ukraine Crisis Media Center, and today we talk about Russian opposition media. If you want to find out how exactly are they linked to the Russian war against Ukraine, which is a primary topic of our discussions here, please subscribe to our channel and stay tuned. So anyone who knows anything about the situation in Russia after the start of its large-scale aggression against Ukraine also knows that the censorship there has almost reached the level of USSR, which Vladimir Putin and his cronies are so eager to rebuild with the support, it seems, of the majority of Russian population. Many argue, and I'm inclined to agree, that this is yet another sign of how badly the things are actually going in Ukraine for the Russian army, because if you're winning a war, you don't need to hurriedly introduce legislation that jails people for 15 years for discrediting the Russian armed forces. But the important thing for us to understand is that even before February 24th, Russia did not enjoy the freedom of speech. Few of the outlets considered liberal and independent were indeed quite different from the sci-fi level of propaganda seen on the directly state-controlled federal channels. However, being less ludicrous doesn't necessarily make you objective and independent. Russian liberal media and their representatives have on numerous occasions pushed the key Kremlin's narratives on Ukraine, including the one of the Nazism problem in Ukraine, which eventually became a reason for the large-scale invasion and all the horrors that it entailed. What is the reason for this? Is it colonial optics that it seems cannot be disregarded by the Russian society? Or is it the indirect ties with the Russian government or other stakeholders? Today we try to find out with Ksenia Iluk, an analyst at Detector Media, Maria Avdeeva, research director at the European Expert Association, Dmitry Herbovich, editor of the journal Polityczna from Poland, Ruslan Denichenko, co-founder of Stop Fake, Alexander Hollowov, data analyst at Deutsche Welle and a former journalist at Deutsche Welle, and Makola Balaban, deputy head of the Center for Strategic Communications and Information Security. And we start with Ksenia Iluk, who shares the key takeaways of the most recent research by Detector Media dedicated specifically to the Russian liberal outlets.
Russian liberal media different from the state ones? Yes. Does that mean we could trust them? No. Unfortunately, even before full-scale invasion of Ukraine, there were various cases when they were repeating the narratives of Russian disinformation. Detector Media has recently analyzed the content of key Russian liberal media, so I'd be very glad to share the insights from our analysis. So one of the key takeaways that most of them do not call the war a war, which from one side we could explain by the Russian censorship and Russia's attempts to censor the word itself. Nonetheless, they try to substitute it with rather vague and ambiguous words such as military operations, military activities. Sometimes they use aggression, but do not mention whose aggression it is. So it is very, very ambiguous and very disturbing, I would say. What is also interesting that some of them stopped using the word. Some of them decided that they would delete this word from their previous materials. But some of them went even farther. They deleted the whole pieces when there was mention of war, when there was mention of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So they deleted the whole article, the whole piece. And now when you just could find it in Google and open it, you would find that this page was deleted. So there are a lot of materials that were simply deleted because of one word. Also, what is interesting is how they cover topics that are related to war. For instance, sanctions that were in the first place put as the answer to Russia's full invasion of Ukraine. But you can't find articles explaining why those sanctions are there, why they are justified, what are the backbones of it, and what are the consequences of it. But what we found on most Russian liberal media is lifestyle articles explaining how to keep up, how to hold on. They are giving some life hacks on how to replace some of the products that are going to be banned, with no proper explanations about the background why these sanctions are there in the first place, which is indeed very disturbing as well. The same thing goes to reporting on events that are caused by these sanctions. Also, what is disturbing is that they give examples of case studies from Iran and North Korea as the great examples how to live without access to the global internet, how to live in a controlled information environment, which is also, from the perspective of media, quite dangerous thing to have, because these are the messages that they are sending to Russian audience, kind of motivating them that North Korea and going farther and farther away from any kind of democratic future is actually fine. They often talk about the destruction of houses in Ukraine, about death of civilians, and about the horrors that Ukraine is going through, but they do not name whose fault is that. There are much more insight of the analysis that we have done that I could share with you, but just to sum up, I consider this insight that I have just shared with you quite a good example of why we cannot trust Russian liberal media, unfortunately, but we can't.
Our next guest, Maria Avdeeva, a research director at the European Expert Association, has just returned from reality that is very different from the life hack advices provided by the Russian liberal media, as discussed before. She sends her message from Trostenets, a city in the Sumy region, which has been recently liberated by the Ukrainian forces from the Russian occupation. Witnessing all the horrors and destruction left there by the Russian army, she talks about how exactly media, and not just our usual propaganda suspects, enabled this war.
Hello, my name is Maria Avdeeva. I'm research director at the European Expert Association, and I'm recording this video from Trostenets, a small town outside of Sumy, 50 kilometers from Sumy. And Trostenets was occupied by Russian troops for more than a month, and it was liberated by Ukrainian army not long ago. And I was seeing today the terrifying, the awful aftermath of the Russian occupation. Destroyed houses, hospitals, buried people in the yards, in the courtyards, unidentified bodies in the morgue, and all other awful things that Russian army left after them in this small town, in Trostenets and other Ukrainian towns. And that is why it's very hard for me to speak about any liberal Russian media, because I think that the whole ecosystem of Russian media that was functioning in Russia was creating unintentionally or intentionally the foundations for this war. They made this war possible by not putting enough pressure on the government in Russia, by not revealing all murders and on all war crimes committed by Russian government, by not informing people enough about what is happening, what Russia is doing to Ukraine and to other countries. And all that disinformation and propaganda made possible this war to happen. And now we see the results of this ecosystem working together. I think that it is very important to understand that the Russian state media and also so-called liberal media were both used by Russian special services to create grounds for this aggressive war and for this invasion of Ukraine. I think that those people who were hiding something or who were deliberately spreading mis and disinformation through these media channels have the same responsibility for this war as those who are given the orders and who are fulfilling the criminal orders. That is why we now have to have a very clear understanding of how these liberal, so-called liberal media were used by Russia to create these grounds, to understand fully what is their role now, and if they are urging people in Russia to go out and protest, or just simply staying aside and saying that there is no way of how to stop Putin, because saying that means the same as supporting Putin's aggressive war in Ukraine. And I think that we all know the answer, and the answer is that they are being used the same as the Russian state media. And I think it's very important for everyone in the world to understand that, because there is a very clear tendency right now about the so-called good Russians and good Russian media, and that there is a necessity to bring information to Russian people. Russian people are fully aware of the war crimes committed by their country here in Ukraine. They don't want to see them. That is the problem. And that means that they and those who provide this information, who spread this information, should be held responsible, as well as all those who commit the war crimes.
Our colleague from Poland, Dmitry Herbovich, editor of the journal Polityczna, shares his perception of the Russian media and assesses how exactly the Kremlin controls domestic information flow and what does it mean for us.
The situation in Ukraine has been the main topic of news around the world for over a month. The whole world is watching the unimaginable cruelty of Russia and is horrified to hear about the genocide in Ukraine. The information reaches us without any problems, but the Russian citizens don't have such a possibility. In Russia, the authorities pursue a policy of severe repressions against the media, and it is forbidden to speak about war or invasion, and the war is called a special operation. Several sanctions are applied against journalists who oppose the government and this narrative. Some media, of course, oppose the government, for example, Novaya Gazeta or Dieva of Moscow, but now they have been forced to close their business. Independent media portals in Russia are blocked now and access to them is limited. They can usually be accessed by changing the VPN. Recently, four independent media in Russia launched a lawsuit against Putin's propaganda, but as we know, it will have no effect. Currently, if any media messages are directed from Russia now, they are often propaganda messages. The media is a powerful tool of government, and that is why Putin wouldn't allow independent media to function in Russia. Currently, his goal in domestic politics now is to completely cut off citizens from outside information. So which media or journalists have the courage to oppose him? That is why we should be careful when we interpreting any information coming from the Russia. There is a war, including an information war, and the enemy will do anything to harm Ukraine and all of Europe. He will have no problem sending us a false information, and he will gladly use fictional independent media for this. So in conclusion, we should never completely trust any journalist, newspaper, television, or radio from Russia, even if they are seemingly against the authorities. Thank you.
We further explore the issue with Ruslan Denichenko, a co-founder of Stop Fake, one of the most famous fact-checking organizations and official partner to Facebook in Ukraine. Ruslan carefully walks us through rather complex issues. For example, if some Russian media are in opposition to Vladimir Putin and his regime, does it mean that they are and should be perceived as friends of Ukraine? Let's find out.
Мені здається, що треба розділяти і не можна ставити знак рівності між тим, що якщо ти проти Путіна, то ти за Україну. І для нас це дуже важливо розуміти. Я сподіваюся, що люди в інших країнах також це розуміють, що не завжди вороги Путіна – наші друзі, друзі українців. Тому що Дуже часто так буває, що сьогодні хтось виступає проти Путіна і знімає якісь там фільми про його палаци, про корупцію в путінському оточенні, а завтра він говорить, що Крим не бутерброд і Крим повертати Україні не можна. Або людина, яка вибігає з плакатом на російське телебачення на 8 секунд і показує, що ні війні, а через тиждень ця людина вже розказує всім людям в Європі, що не треба вводити санкції проти Росії, бо це шкодить простим громадянам Росії. Тому для нас, для українців, я думаю, що це зрозуміло, і я сподіваюся, що інші люди в інших країнах також зрозуміють нашу позицію, чому ми не ставимо знак рівності між тими, хто виступає проти Путіна, і друзями України. Для нас це дуже важливо. Навіть я і команда StopFake випробували на собі ставлення так званих ліберальних медіа. Нас зовсім безпідставно назвали нацистами і намагалися зіпсувати нашу репутацію, підірвати довіру до того, що ми робимо, на підставі абсолютно якихось фейкових, незрозумілих звинувачень. І, на жаль, всю цю кампанію проти нас так само підтримали дуже багато так званих вихідців із ліберальних медіа або так званих російських лібералів. Для нас це було дуже образливо і незрозуміло, хоча пізніше ми знов-таки зрозуміли, чому це робиться. Тому що дуже часто для російських лібералів питання України – це там, де їхній лібералізм закінчується. Вони звикли і хочуть, щоб було так, що раптом не буде Путіна, і все буде так, як було раніше. Так, як було при Радянському Союзі, ми знову будемо жити в мирі, і все буде, наче війни не було між нами. Цього не буде. Ми ніколи не забудемо те, що робили проти нас, напади проти нас і до війни, і особливо під час війни. Стосунки України і Росії ніколи не будуть такими самими. І так само стосунки між звичайними українцями і звичайними росіянами ніколи не будуть такими, якими вони могли бути і якими вони були багато років назад або до війни. Мені здається, що і західні медіа, і західні експерти повинні розуміти, що дуже часто і деякі журналісти західних ЗМІ ретранслюють меседжі, які згенеровані в тому ж самому Кремлі, але вони доставлені і упаковані в якісь такі ліберальні, красиві обгортки. Знову-таки історія із «Ехо Москви» радіо, і історія з «Новою газетою», які довгий час були для Заходу начебто взірцем того, що в Росії ще залишається хоч якась там свобода слова. І треба їх підтримувати. І треба підтримувати тих журналістів, які втекли на Захід, російських журналістів, які втекли на Захід і роблять там якісь журналістські проекти. Але все одно мені здається, що так чи інакше це були і залишаються проекти Кремля. Тобто це спосіб, в який Кремль ретранслював необхідні йому меседжі до залишків ліберальної якоїсь громадськості в самій Росії. Кремлю потрібні були ці ЗМІ, поки вони йому були потрібні, хоч для чогось, вони їх тримали. Як тільки ця необхідність зникла, ці ЗМІ закрили. Тому знову-таки дуже важливо, щоб на Заході розуміли цю особливість і не сприймали ці ліберальні ЗМІ російські і залишки ліберальної якоїсь громадськості, які діють на Заході, не сприймали їх як друзів України. І вони не дивувалися, чому Україна їх не сприймає, чому українські журналісти так не радо з ними не спілкуються і не сприймають їх як своїх колег. У нас є до них велика пересторога, у нас є до них дуже багато запитань, і ця війна особливо загострила це, і вона показала, що все ж таки українці, які дотримуються цієї точки зору, вони все-таки праві.
To elaborate on this rather complex issue, we turn to the deputy head of the Center for Strategic Communications and Information Security, Makola Balaban. He briefly gives us several really important examples to think about.
So the first case is Echo Moskvy and editor-in-chief Mr. Venediktov. For example, he, since 2014, and up till now, he does not change his views that in 2014, there was in Ukraine started the civil war, which is absolutely not true. And it's very good fitted with a narrative of like Russian propaganda and Putin. The second case is also, you know, that Echo Moskvy was closed. But when we're talking about information, when Mr. Venediktov spoke at his YouTube channel, Живой Гвоздь, he said about the war, about, of course, they have to say a special military operation. But for example, he said maybe there was not an order to storm the Ukrainian cities such as Kyiv or Kharkiv. And this, like, you know, it's relativization of this Russian invasion. It's also, I think, very fitted to general line of like Kremlin narrative, especially in this segment of working with more sophisticated, let's put it like that, auditories. And the main narrative that is pushing, it's called like "Не всё так однозначно." Nothing is so clear. And of course, I think it's also harmful.
As we move closer to the wrap-up, we turn to the former journalist at Deutsche Welle, who is now a data analyst there, Alexander Hollowov, who reiterates some of the most important points of this discussion, distinguishing between being anti-Putin and being objective, talking about the influence of colonial optics and giving some of the most vivid examples of what those optics result in when it comes to how Russian media cover Ukraine, especially if some of this media have close connection to the security services. Are you intrigued? Because I am. Let's find out.
First of all, I really believe that when we are talking about so-called Russian liberal media, they are foremost Russian and only then liberal. Russian in this case means that they are actively, passively, sometimes unconsciously using the common imperial narratives about Ukraine. I won't blame them that they are doing because they are doing this intentionally. Nevertheless, really imperialistic in their mindset. They are talking about brotherhood between two nations, not mentioning that this brotherhood is quite an abusive relationship where Ukrainians didn't have the right to be equal for centuries. They didn't have the right for their language, for their culture, for their real political independence. And therefore, when they are talking about some misunderstanding or some brotherhood that was spoiled by Putin and Putinists, it's totally untrue. It was not spoiled. It was spoiled from the beginning. But we are talking about objectivity. It's difficult to be objective when you are a part of this imperial narrative, when you are actively or passively, as I told, spreading this narrative. So it's not an objectivity in the full understanding of this world. But it's somehow philosophical questions. There are some more issues that make me quite skeptical about Russian liberal media. First of all, it's really not so easy to talk about their independence, because even if you're starting to investigate how are these media organized, Echo Moskvy, this famous radio station, quite liberal. Venediktov is kind of icon of liberal Russian journalism, but it was owned by Gazprom Media, its state-owned holding. And Venediktov himself, in his interviews, doesn't mind to tell about his conversations with some FSB officers about the things that they are discussing in his radio station. Actually, when he was giving a huge interview about closure of his station recently, he told that these FSB representatives gave him transcripts of the live coverage in this radio station, which actually looks a little bit suspicious for me. So how can a radio station be independent being in such tight bound with Russian FSB? So when we are talking about Nezavisimaya Gazeta, independent newspaper translated in English, Nobel Prize for its independence for its famous journalist, Alexander Lebedev is a former KGB officer. He is an oligarch. And nevertheless, he has a stake in this newspaper. He claims that it's only 10%, but nevertheless, I'm quite skeptical about former KGB officer being trustworthy owner of this newspaper. When we are talking about some stuff that they're doing for themselves, they like self-censorship of Nezavisimaya Gazeta, when they were told to shut up because their news coverage about Russian-Ukrainian war was not like in line with official stance of Russian government. And they said, okay, we have to shut up. We have to stop producing news, stop writing articles just because we were told so.
We hope today's discussion brought some additional context to take into account when thinking and talking about the Russian opposition and liberal media. You've been watching the episode of Ukrainian Flames, a special project by Ukraine Crisis Media Center, Ukraine Catholic University's Analytical Center, and NGO Euro-Atlantic Course. In the description to this video, you can find information on how you personally can help Ukraine in the face of the Russian aggression. If you find our job useful, please like and share this video, as well as subscribe to our channel and stay tuned. And while you do that, remember that everything is going to be Ukraine.